Hi everyone, it's Victor speaking. And today I'm here to talk about solar return charts. So I've received some requests to give you a little bit of a guideline of how to go about the solar return chart or what my expertise suggests, because there are plenty of ways of reading the solar return chart. And I think it's maybe time to give you a little bit of an insight of how I read the solar return chart. Of course, many of us are interested in what the future holds for us. And this is something which is not easy to grasp, but we can actually pinpoint events and energies by looking at different timing techniques. Most probably, transit is one of the most popular one out there. And the another one is going to be the solar return chart. So what is the solar return chart? A chart cast for the exact time when the sun reaches its natal position each year. So, for instance, if you have got the sun on 16 degrees of Aquarius, then we want to examine when the sun returns to its natal position, and that's going to be happening once a year. Now, it doesn't always happen at the moment of your actual birth. So sometimes the sun is going to return a day earlier, sometimes on the day, and sometimes a day later. It is very much due to the leap year, for instance, and there are other considerations as well. So it is a direct forecasting method as it looks at the current transit when the sun returns to its original position. But I would call it as the snapshot of your actual birthday, and because the sun is very much about the hero's journey, so it's going to be describing what you kind of have to experience within that time frame of 12 months. So, for instance, if you have got an eclipse, so there was an eclipse on your birthday, that would be coloring your entire year, and that topic would be very, very prominent. Solar return lasts from one birthday to another. So approximately it describes 12-month period in your life. And some astrologers believe that it might get triggered 2 or 3 months earlier as well, when the sun is actually squaring its natal position. But I haven't really seen enough evidence for that, to be frank. Another major question is where to erect the solar return chart. So I tend to erect the solar return chart for the place of birth rather than the relocated one. And the reason is because I believe that we were born to a certain place for a reason. And we always going to be carrying that karmic energy with us. However, I think the best practice is if you are going to be mixing, so look at your relocated solar return chart as well as your natal solar return chart as well. Now, you can use the solar return chart as a standalone chart, meaning that you are not going to be putting it outside of your natal chart. But I think the best is when you actually use a bi-wheel. So meaning that you put your solar return chart on top of your natal chart. So one of the most important part of the solar return are the angles. So the solar return ascendant gives you clues into the year ahead. It talks about the flavor of the most important area of life you need to focus on. And the sign will describe how you perceive the year, and the house position going to show you what area of life you will have your focus on. So the solar return chart, the sign is very much about how you present yourself in the year. So, for instance, let's imagine that you have got your rising sign falling into the sign of Capricorn, for instance, in the 5th house. So how are you going to be approaching the year is going to be a very Capricornian way. So maybe with commitment and seriousness. And you are going to be focusing quite a lot on the 5th house energies. So what's 5th house? It's all about taking risks, children, sexuality, something to do with speculative businesses. I would also like to mention that do not forget to turn the chart. What does turning the chart mean? Basically, a snapshot of the year does not only talk about you, but it talks about people around you as well, who might be influencing your year. So, for instance, the fifth house can be a friend's partnership house, because there's the seventh from the 11th, right? Your friend is going to be the 11th house. And then if you count from the 11th, you need to count 7 to get to the fifth house. So maybe it's going to be talking about the fact that you are going to your best friend's wedding party, for instance, or your best friend is going to get married, and somehow you're going to get ignored, or you feel, a little bit emotional over this because you feel that you have lost your best friend. But unfortunately, the fifth house could be, for instance, the eighth from the 10th. So that could talk about the transformation of the mother or the death of the mother as well. So many people, sometimes, my rising sign is in the fifth house and nothing really happened. But maybe the topic of children somehow is in the picture, because you see other people having children, but somehow it might not be successful for you, and so forth. So very important that you turn the chart as well, and then you're looking at from different angles. So for instance, the fifth house also is the 11th from the 7th. So it could indicate the best friend of your partner. And maybe that's how it's going to be influencing your relationship with your partner, or your love life, or how much you guys going out, having fun, and so forth. Okay. Also, as a first step, once you've identified your rising sign, I would always look at the aspects to the rising sign degree, especially within about 3 to 5 degrees. So when you have got squares and oppositions towards the solar return rising sign, those are going to be talking about blockages and differences. Meaning that, let's suppose that Uranus is square in your rising sign, your solar return rising sign. So somehow the topic of freedom, rebellious energy, is going to get the center of that year, right? You're going to have to look at where that Uranus is, what area of life, what sign, but I'm going to come on to that a little bit later on. And you also want to be looking at trines and sextiles, and those are going to be the helping influences. So as a next step, always look at where the ruler of the ascendant is. And that's going to be another focus of the area of your life, and try to read them together. So for example, you might have got your rising sign in the fifth house, and the ruler of your solar return rising sign is triggering the natal eighth house, which would be the fourth in your solar return chart. So I'm going to show you an example in a second. So let's just think about what that means. So we've got somehow the family, as in fourth house energy. Fifth house is all about children, and the eighth house is all about transformation. So this might be talking about the fact that someone is, for instance, going to get pregnant that year. Okay, so I'm just going to bring up a chart for you, and I'll show you how exactly I mean that. Okay, so here is the example of Christina Onassis. I hope I pronounced her name well. But let's just have a look at what we can see here. So what we've learned so far is that you are going to be looking at the rising sign itself. And the rising sign is in the sign of Virgo. So the approach to the year is going to be very Virgo-like. So systematic, maybe critical, something to do with creating an order in chaos. Very much about your lifestyle, maybe a health-orientated year. And we can see that it's triggering the fifth house. So fifth house is all about children, something to do with creativity, something to do with your sex life, romance, dating. But as I said, it's also worth having a look at from different perspectives as well. So for instance, if I want to be looking at from the mom's perspective, the mom is the 10th house. So that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 sign away from the mom. So that would be the mom's 8th house, which could indicate that the mom is going to go through a certain type of transformation crisis situations. Or if I look at it from the dad's perspective, which is the 2nd from the 4th, so that would be the father's financial situation. Or if I look at it from the perspective of the sibling, then that would be the 1, 2, 3, so the 3rd sign away from the sibling. So it could indicate a brother or a sister. Okay, so once we have done that, I will be looking at where the ruler of the rising sign is. And that is in the 3rd sign away from the rising sign, because 1, 2, 3. So somehow the 5th house energy is getting combined with the 3rd, as well as the 7th. 7th, because it's all about, the Mercury is triggering the 7th house. So the major significant event of the year, which is going to be influencing her, is 5th, 3rd, and 7th house related. So 5th house is, as I said, all about creativity and children. 3rd house is all about communication and siblings. And 7th house is all about media. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, so once we've done that, you can exactly do the same with looking at the ruler of the year, the ruler of the rising sign, what type of aspect that is going to be receiving. By the way, talking about Christina, that was the year when she lost her brother in a plane crash. I think that's very visible from her solar return chart, because obviously it was a Virgo rising sign, which is health related. The ruler is in the 3rd house from the rising sign, in the sign of Scorpio, which talks about, unfortunately, transformation and death. Okay, so as a next step, of course, the star of the show is always going to be the sun in the solar return, because that's the name of it, right? We're examining when the sun returns to its original position. And the sun house placement actually has got a pattern. So I really recommend looking at this pattern, because it could really indicate some pivotal years for you. So the sun spends about 10 years in angular houses, then 10 years in succeedant, followed by cadent houses for another 10 years. So the sun has got this 30-year journey. Now, if you are unaware of what angular houses, succeedant, or cadent houses mean, then angular are the 1st, 4th, 7th, and 10th, succeedant 2nd, 5th, 8th, and 11th, and the cadent are the 3rd, 6th, 9th, and 12th. So, the sun travels through each of these houses for 10 years, and then it changes houses. So when there is a change happening, usually those are quite important years, but it is only true if you don't move. Then the pattern remains. If you move around and you are using the relocated rising sign, you are not going to be able to see this pattern. So as I said, sun covers all the houses in 30 years time. And those are the pivotal years when the sun changes modality. So for example, from moving to angular to succeedant houses. And you might want to create a table for it to see when it's exactly happening. So this works extremely well if you live on the equator, or if you use equal houses or whole sign system, or if you never move. But I tend to not to relocate the chart, so I still get this pattern quite nicely. Some people believe if you travel on your birthday, then actually you can change your fate. Now, I haven't really experimented this enough, but I will do that once COVID has finished. I've decided from next year onwards, I am going to be traveling on my birthday. Why? Because if you don't want, for instance, to have the sun in the 12th house on your birthday, then you can pick a location where it is going to be falling into your 7th house, for instance, if you want to be focusing on relationship. Or if you want to be focusing on opening a business, then you might want to put the sun into your 10th house. So each year, the sign position of the sun is going to remain. However, the sun position will change. So to bring up Christina's chart again, we can look at what exactly was going on with her sun. So we can see that natally she's got an 8th house sun, right? But the sun is in the 4th house in the solar return chart, because 1, 2, 3, 4. So somehow the family as in topic becomes extremely important in this chart. So, and then after you want to be looking at the aspects to that sun. So what is the sun doing? Maybe it's going to be sextile in the moon. Maybe it's going to get it's square in the rising sign, in the solar return rising sign, and so forth. So you want to be looking at those aspects. But in order for you to have a great understanding over your chart, you always must look at your natal position first to understand what energies the planet carries. So for instance, what does it mean to have a sun in the 8th house in Sagittarius, right? And that's going to be the energy, what the sun is always going to carry around, but it gets colored by the solar return aspects. Okay, so once you have identified the sun, you might want to be looking at, for instance, if you have got any stelliums going on in your chart. So meaning that, for instance, this time around, people who were born in February, they have got 6 planets in the sign of Aquarius. So that is going to get a special attention. By the way, solar return chart is something which comes from the Dorothean times. And he had a guideline of how to interpret solar return charts. So the first rule he mentioned was that return oppositions to the natal positions show difficulties. So we're talking about whole sign oppositions here. So imagine that you have got Mars in the sign of Capricorn in your natal chart, but in your solar return chart, it's going to be in Cancer. So obviously Mars is in an opposite sign from where he is natally. So that shows that the year might be a slightly bit difficult. He mentioned there's a second rule that the transit of out of sect malefic to, sorry, to natal satellite or benefic is different. Okay, so let's just explore this rule a little bit. So the sect concept is a Hellenistic way of thinking. If you were born in a daytime, so it means that the sun was on top of the sky somewhere above the horizon, then basically Jupiter is the most benefic planet, and Mars is going to be your most malefic planet. If you were born at a nighttime, then Venus is the most benefic, and Saturn is going to be the most malefic planet in your chart. So imagine that, for instance, you were born with the sun daytime, and you've got Jupiter in the sign of Sagittarius. So then your solar return Mars is in the sign of Sagittarius. Now, this would indicate some difficulties because Jupiter is the most benefic planet, but then Mars, the most malefic planet, comes around and giving a little bit of a headache to your most beneficial planets. So you might want to be looking at those. Then also, he said to watch out for malefic squares and oppositions and benefic trines. So, for instance, Saturn and Mars are the most malefic planets. So if they are squaring or opposing one of your luminaries in the solar return chart, or your rising sign ruler, or the rising sign itself, it generally can indicate that it's going to be a little bit of a difficult year, and somehow that malefic planet is going to be a dominating energy. But you can do the same with the benefics as well. So we're talking about Jupiter and Venus trining the sect light, or trining your rising sign, the rising sign ruler. That could be actually quite a positive year. Another thing Dorotheus mentioned, to watch transits to dark places of your natal chart. So we're talking about the 6th, 8th, and the 12th house. Even the 2nd house was mentioned as well. And he mentions the 3rd house as moderately a difficult house. So he believed that if you have got planets there in your solar return chart, it could be a little bit of a difficult year. The best houses are the 1st, 10th, 11th, 5th, 7th, 4th, and last but not least, the 9th house, exactly in this order. As a 5th rule, he mentioned that the natal and return moon are particularly important. So the house of the return moon in your solar return chart is a focal area, because that talks about how you can be happy. That talks about your emotional well-being. So if the solar return moon, for instance, in the 1st house, in the solar return chart, he mentioned that could indicate that the health is going to be a key to the given year. If the solar return moon is, for instance, in the natal 10th house, or in the 10th house, or triggering the 10th house, then it shows some type of public events, which are good or bad, depending on how the planet is influenced by the benefics and the malefic planets. Or for instance, if your solar return moon is falling into your 7th house, it could indicate success over enemies. Solar return moon in the 4th house shows some type of secret matters, or something to do with family matters, but something which you want to keep behind closed doors. So as a 6th rule, he also mentioned annual profection of the ascendant shows the most important places in the chart. So I'm not going to go into annual profection today, what exactly it means, because maybe that is a different chart or video. But if you type in Google, profection wheel, astrology, I recommend putting that then there. So astrology, and then go on the images and perfection, that's why. Sorry about that. Perfection astrology wheel. Yeah, here you go. So we're gonna click on that. You're just gonna have to choose how old you are. So for instance, at the moment, I'm 38 years old, turned recently. That's a 3rd house here. I hope you can see on the picture. So he believes that one of the most important house of the year is going to be somehow the 3rd, if you are 38 years old. And you might want to be looking at where the ruler is. So for instance, looking at Christina's chart, in 1972, she was 22 years old. So the age of 22, if we go on the profection wheel, we can start looking where it is. Then you will be able to see that, let's see where 22 is. It's an 11th house profected year. So 11th house is all about long-term goals, gains, hopes, and wishes. And you might want to be looking at where the ruler is. And the ruler is Jupiter is also there. So somehow the gains are going to be significantly important for her this year. By the way, by losing her brother, she had plenty of gains from her father, who died a couple of years later. She inherited all the money, and that's how she became basically rich. Okay, so these are the steps of a solar return chart interpretation. So what I'm going to do for you is I'm going to be bringing an example for next time, and then we can analyze that. So we can look at these, how to go about them. But this is going to be now the theoretical part of it. So with the next video, I will bring you an example how to actually read your solar return chart. So thank you very much for your attention. If you believe that there is someone out there who wants to learn more about solar return chart, then please share my video. It does not cost anything to you. And please press like, also ring your notification bell so that you know when I'm going to be coming up with the next tutorial. Have a blessed day and see you soon. Bye-bye.